Corbett has presented his budget to the legislature, highlighting education, job creation, and health care as his top priorities. Here to give his take on the proposal is Representative Ryan Mackenzie of the 134th District in Berks and Lehigh counties. Representative Mackenzie, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get into particulars about the specific things that Governor Corbett presented, let's set the table a little bit. And can you tell viewers out there a little bit about the budget process and how it works and where we're at in that process right now?
Sure. The governor's budget proposal and the speech that he laid out for us is really the start of the process. And so it's a long process running from early February all the way up until June 30th, which is our constitutional deadline to pass a budget. And so after the governor gives his address, then there's going to be a series of hearings in both the House and the Senate with all the different departments across our state agencies. They're going to come before the legislature, talk about their budgets, their proposals that were encompassed in the governor's budget address. And then after that, we'll actually start negotiations within the House and the Senate. And there are different elements and different parts to the budget. So in addition to what everybody commonly thinks about the budget, that's typically the appropriations bill that funds all of the different state programs. There are also a number of other bills that typically go along with a budget in Pennsylvania. So fiscal code, a tax code, a welfare code, and an education code. Those four bills typically go along with the appropriations as well. And all of those things, again, have to be passed by June 30th. It's in the Constitution of Pennsylvania that the legislature has to pass those on time. And in the past 3 years, since Republicans have been in control, they have passed that successfully on time, and we look forward to doing that again this year.
Sounds good. And understanding again that it is a starting point, it's a blueprint. What was your initial reaction to what you heard today from the governor?
Yeah, I was encouraged by a lot of what the governor talked about, focusing on priorities like education and job creation. Those are things that are critically important to our communities. And so I was encouraged by some of the items, particularly in education. There were large increases in education funding, but some things that I was specifically looking at were additional funding in special education, an additional $20 million, and also an additional $10 million for early childhood education. And that $10 million actually comes on top of $51 million in additional funding that was received from the state, from the federal government in Race to the Top funding. So really, those were two important things that I saw. But overall, again, looks like we're getting education in a position where we can appropriately and adequately fund it here in Pennsylvania, and that's a real positive for our communities.
Well, the governor focused kind of on three main areas, education, job creation, and then also health care. Let's talk about education. You brought that one up as being one that's important to you and important to everyone across the Commonwealth. I mean, obviously, that's a high priority, and it takes up a large portion of our budget. He, again, proposed a $360 million increase for basic education, specifically special education, and some early learning programs to get our kids off to the right start. Can you just expand on your thoughts on that education proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the governor laid out a proposal for education, which I thought was very strong, $10.3 billion for basic education. That's the most ever in state history, and so really, again, a strong proposal on education, investing in the future, showing that it's a top priority for us in the legislature. And myself, as a graduate of our local public schools, I graduated from Parkland High School, went all the way through the school system there, received a great education. We want to make sure that all students today and in the future have that same opportunity, and so making this type of investment is very important for us.
And certainly this is a continuation over the previous budgets that we've seen Governor Corbett present. We lost some federal money that really put us kind of behind the eight ball. Can you discuss how that worked?
Sure. So before I came to the legislature, there was a significant decrease in education funding because of a loss of federal stimulus dollars. Those dollars were one-time funding sources. They were known that they weren't going to be coming back after the stimulus money dried up. Yet the previous governor, Ed Rendell, used that money for operating budgets for education. And so when that money went away, that created a huge hole in education funding here in Pennsylvania. And so we have been trying to build that up since I've been in the legislature. I've always been voting to increase education funding, something I've been very proud of and something that I've fought for, and we're going to continue to do that. The other part of education funding, which is built into the budget, relates to pensions. And previously, for 10 years, the pensions for school districts and state employees were not funded or underfunded. And so this budget funds that, has the contribution made to the pension system, which is the responsible thing to do. And we have to do that going forward to make sure that the retirement is there for those who are relying on it in the future.
Second point of emphasis for the governor was job creation. He complimented the legislature and he said, quote, "Over the past 3 years, we have reduced the tax burden on Pennsylvanians by $1 billion. He said he'd like to continue with some things, including the phase out of the capital stock and franchise tax. And also, he's devoting $450 million to job training in this proposal. Do you feel Pennsylvania is headed in the right direction as far as preparing a good business climate?
Sure. I think we are coming out of the 2008 financial recession. Obviously, we were in a tough spot here in Pennsylvania, and we've been slowly getting out of that. But I think the policies are putting us on solid footing to build on that going forward. And, what I like is that we're making our tax code more fair here in Pennsylvania. And what I mean by that is while there are reductions in business taxes, things like capital stock and franchise tax is coming down. That's a tax which is just purely on assets and being in business. So regardless of whether your business is making a profit or not, you would have to pay that tax, and that's not fair. It's difficult for businesses in a struggling economy to have to pay a tax like that. So we've continued to phase that out, but at the same time, in something that I was a big part of, I was the prime sponsor of the Tax Reform Code of 2013, and in that we closed the Delaware loophole. So that was a $50 million loophole which corporations were utilizing unfairly, in my opinion, here in Pennsylvania. And so we closed that loophole, but we were able to bring down some of these other taxes which are onerous on businesses. And so I think we're making a better business climate here in Pennsylvania, but there's a lot more work to be done as well.
Certainly. And then the third focus for the governor was on health care, and of course that's a topic all over the headlines these days with the Affordable Care Act. His alternative to that is called Health EPA. He's projecting it would save the Commonwealth about $125 million, but it is still awaiting federal approval. Expenses related to the Affordable Care Act are a big contributor to the proposed welfare budget, Department of Welfare budget. Can you explain how that welfare budget works and what makes it up? There's certainly a perception of what Department of Welfare spends their money on, and then there's a reality.
Sure. So there are really two things that you talked about there, the first being Obamacare and then the second, overall welfare spending. So Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act as it's properly known, is a big part of our rising costs here in Pennsylvania. And so in this year's budget, it's anticipated that the costs across all of the welfare programs that are tied up in the Affordable Care Act, we're going to see an increase of $220 million in state appropriations because of Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. So that's a huge driving cost factor, second only to pensions, which is an increase of about $600 million. So those two things are some of our biggest cost drivers here in the state. And so that Affordable Care Act, what we've seen with it is it's not only driving costs, but it's also creating a lot of conversation and discussions here in the Capitol. And so the governor has a proposal which he has laid out for the federal government. And what it would do is it would allow for the expansion of coverage to an additional 500,000 individuals here in Pennsylvania. They would receive subsidies to pay for their health care on the private market, something that I think is a good idea. And then also what it would do is it would institute significant reforms in our welfare system. And so Medicaid, or medical assistance as it's known here in Pennsylvania, encompasses about 2.2 million people across our Commonwealth. And right now, the average cost of those individuals who are utilizing that system in Pennsylvania is about $7,000. Now, the problem is that across the country, the average is closer to $4,000 or $5,000. So we are significantly more expensive in Medicaid or medical assistance on a per-person basis. And so the governor has asked Washington to accept his reforms to bring that cost down. And then what you could do with that savings is expand it to include the extra 500,000 people. So I think that's a very common sense approach. Now, we have to wait and see what the federal government approves, what response they give to the governor. governor's proposal. So we really do have to wait and see on that proposal. But I think it's an innovative approach that I like to see in government. I think all too often people just want to take a shortcut and do the expansion of Medicaid. Well, that would drive a significant cost in Pennsylvania, which we already talked about. We have a difficult budget ahead of us, and so I think we have to be smarter than we have in the past with some of these policy decisions.
You had mentioned the pension issue that we have going on in Pennsylvania, both state employees and school employees as well. Governor Corbett challenged the legislature to tackle that along with liquor privatization. What are your projections on the possibilities of one or both or neither getting done, and are they tied to the success of successful budget passage?
Yeah, the two things that the governor had laid out as reforms that he would like to see, liquor privatization and pension reform, are carryovers from last year. And so in the House, we passed a liquor privatization bill, and we sent that over to the Senate. The Senate has been deliberating on that for quite a while now, and we're hoping that they're going to act and send something back to us. I think certainly consumers across the Commonwealth are looking for greater convenience when it comes to the purchase of beer and wine. They'd like to see that in their grocery stores or maybe even their convenience stores. And I think that's something that we should move towards, and so hopefully we're going to accomplish that in this year's budget period leading up to June 30th there. The second thing, pension reform, is an absolute must. That must happen, and so the reason I say that is that number is about $50 billion in unfunded liabilities. And so, again, to put that in perspective, the overall budget the governor has proposed here is $29.4 billion. So you can see the size and magnitude of our unfunded liability in the pension system. And so going about looking for reforms to that is critical to our system. The governor included some savings that he would anticipate from reforms in this year's budget, but didn't lay out a specific proposal to get there. He had done that in last year's budget address, and it didn't gain much traction, even though there were some decent ideas in there. And so I think this year you're going to see a lot more ideas generated from the legislature on that pension issue, and I'm optimistic that something will get done.
That's good to hear. And that will help with property taxes at the local level.
Absolutely. Again, a huge problem that affects not only our budget, but property taxes, school funding, many different externalities that come about because of the pension problem.
Well, just to wrap it up, we just have a couple minutes left. What are you hoping to see when June 30th rolls around in that final plan? What types of broad themes?
Sure. Again, I think sticking to our top line principles of being responsible with taxpayer dollars, making sure that government spending is focused on our priorities, no tax increases, and being responsible and passing an on-time budget. Those are the things that I'm looking for. Again, I've seen a lot of the proposals and priorities that I was looking for being highlighted in the governor's address. Now we have to make sure that we put all those pieces to the puzzle together correctly.
Right.
I'm optimistic that the legislature is going to come up with solutions to a lot of these problems, but it takes time. It certainly takes time. There are deliberations that go on between not only the different parties in the House, but then also between the House and the Senate. And so, again, I think there's a lot ahead of us, a lot of work to be done here. But again, I think we'll get to some positive solutions for Pennsylvania.
Great, and I assume you would support on time and no tax increases.
You got it, absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks for your time today. And that is all the time we have for today's program. If you have questions about the budget process or need assistance with any state matter, please contact Representative Mackenzie at his local office or through his website. That information will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and join us next time for Representative Ryan Mackenzie's Legislative Report.